Morgan Davis, 32, sat frozen at her childhood dining table, the manila envelope between her trembling fingers containing proof that would shatter her family forever. Her parents had always treated her sister Claire like she wasn't worth a penny, but finding the altered will that disinherited Claire completely wasn't just favoritism, it was the culmination of a lifetime of lies. As she looked at her father's smug face across the table, Morgan realized this Sunday dinner would be the last time she'd ever break bread with the people who raised her. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper into how my family imploded, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story of family betrayal resonates with you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about how karma eventually finds its way back to those who deserve it. Trust me, what happened after this dinner changed our family forever, and you won't want to miss how justice was finally served. For as long as Morgan could remember, she had been the golden child while her younger sister Claire was treated as an afterthought. Their parents, Richard and Eleanor Davis, wealthy real estate developers in Boston, had created a stark contrast between their daughters that was impossible to ignore. Morgan received new clothes, the latest gadgets, and praise for even her smallest achievements. Meanwhile, Claire wore hand-me-downs despite the family's wealth, was criticized relentlessly, and struggled to receive acknowledgement for even her greatest accomplishments. As children, Morgan hadn't fully understood the disparity. When she got a new bike for Christmas while Claire received only books, she assumed it was because she had asked for a bike specifically. When she was allowed to attend an expensive summer camp while Claire stayed home, she believed it was because Claire was shy and preferred reading. But as they grew older, the pattern became undeniable. Morgan, we've set aside a college fund for you. Harvard, Yale, anywhere you want to go, her father had announced at her high school graduation dinner. When Claire had asked about her own college plans 2 years later, their father had scoffed, "We expect you to work your way through community college. It builds character." Morgan had attended Harvard Business School on her parents' dime, graduating with an MBA and zero debt. Claire had worked 3 jobs to put herself through a state university, eventually earning a teaching degree. Despite the obstacles, Claire had never complained, maintained a perfect GPA, and even won a statewide teaching award during her first year in the classroom. The disparity continued into adulthood. When Morgan bought her first condo, her parents contributed a generous down payment. When she launched her marketing consultancy, they provided startup capital and connections. Claire, meanwhile, rented a tiny apartment and saved every penny, eventually starting a small tutoring business that she built from nothing. What bothered Morgan most wasn't just the favoritism, it was how her parents actively undermined Claire at every turn. When Claire was offered a prestigious teaching position, Eleanor had commented, "Don't get your hopes up. You know you've never been good under pressure." When Claire's tutoring business began to flourish, Richard had dismissed it as playing school, rather than running a real business. The psychological toll on Claire was evident. Though she maintained a bright exterior, Morgan had witnessed her sister's struggles with self-worth. Claire had confided in Morgan during a rare sister night, "Sometimes I wonder what I did wrong. Why they've always thought I was less." Morgan had reassured her sister, but privately, she'd begun to question her parents' behavior more critically. The contrast wasn't subtle, it was as though they had deliberately decided that one daughter deserved everything while the other deserved nothing. And Morgan couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow complicit by accepting her parents' generosity while watching her sister struggle. Last Christmas, the disparity had reached a new level when Richard had given Morgan keys to a vacation property in Vermont. "Consider it an early inheritance," he had said with a wink. Claire had received a $50 gift card. The look of resignation on her sister's face had sparked something in Morgan, a realization that this wasn't normal family dynamics. This was cruelty. Now, sitting at the dining table with the evidence in her hands, Morgan understood that what she had witnessed throughout her life wasn't just favoritism, it was something far more calculated. The question wasn't whether her parents loved one daughter more than the other. The question was, why did they seem to actively despise Claire? As Morgan looked across the table at her father's confident smile and her mother's perfectly composed face, she felt a chill run through her. These people had raised her, shaped her into the successful woman she was today, but at what cost to her sister? And what else had they hidden from both of them? The weight of these revelations settled on Morgan's shoulders as she considered what to do next. She had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over family tensions. But this discovery demanded action, not silence. Her sister deserved justice, and Morgan was suddenly certain that she would be the one to deliver it. The manila envelope that had changed everything had come into Morgan's possession purely by accident 3 days ago. She had been helping her parents organize their home office while they were away on a weekend trip to their country club. Eleanor had asked Morgan to sort through some paperwork and file anything important in their newly purchased filing cabinet. A simple enough task that Morgan had been happy to help with. While organizing the documents, Morgan had come across a folder labeled Family Trust, Confidential. She wouldn't normally have opened it, respecting her parents' privacy, but a loose paper had fallen from the folder, a post-it note in her father's handwriting that read, "Make sure C gets nothing. M gets everything as discussed." With her heart racing, Morgan had opened the folder. Inside was their parents' will, recently updated, that left the entire Davis estate, valued at over $15 million, exclusively to Morgan. Claire wasn't mentioned at all, not even to receive a token inheritance or keepsake. It was as if her sister didn't exist. More disturbing were the attached emails between her father and their family lawyer, Douglas Whitman. In one exchange, Richard had written, "Doug, I need you to ensure that Claire has no legal recourse to challenge this. She's never contributed anything to this family, and I won't have her benefiting from what Eleanor and I have built." The lawyer had responded with concern, "Richard, completely disinheriting a child can lead to legal challenges. I strongly advise including at least a nominal bequest to Claire to make the will more defensible." Richard's reply had been chilling, "Fine. Leave her $1,000 with the stipulation that if she contests, she loses even that. Make it clear she's getting exactly what she deserves, next to nothing." But what had truly shaken Morgan to her core was finding another document behind the will, a DNA test from 29 years ago, shortly after Claire's birth. The results clearly indicated that Richard Davis was not Claire's biological father. Accompanying the test was a handwritten letter from Eleanor to Richard, "I made a terrible mistake, but I'm begging you not to punish the baby for my sins. No one needs to know. We can raise her as our own, and this can remain between us." Richard had apparently kept this letter all these years, his silent justification for treating Claire with such consistent disdain. He had raised her as his daughter in name only, while harboring a private resentment that had poisoned their family dynamic for nearly 3 decades. The discovery explained so much: the differential treatment, the constant criticism, the withholding of affection and support. Richard had been punishing Claire her entire life for a circumstance beyond her control, and Eleanor had allowed it to happen, perhaps out of guilt or fear. Morgan had carefully photographed every document before returning them to the folder. She had spent the next 2 days in a daze, processing this information and considering her options. Should she confront her parents? Tell Claire? Seek legal advice? By the time Sunday dinner arrived, a monthly tradition in the Davis household, Morgan had made her decision. She would confront her parents directly, with evidence in hand, and demand answers. Claire deserved to know the truth, but first, Morgan wanted to understand how her parents could justify their decades of calculated cruelty. As the housekeeper served the main course, Morgan had pulled the envelope from her bag. "There's something we need to discuss," she had said, her voice steadier than she felt. Her father had glanced up from his roast beef, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. "Can't it wait until after dinner?" Your mother went to a lot of trouble with the menu. No, Morgan had replied firmly, it really can't wait any longer. It's waited for 29 years already. Now, as she slid the contents of the envelope across the polished mahogany table, Morgan watched the color drain from both her parents' faces. They recognized the documents immediately. Where did you get those? Her father demanded, his voice a dangerous whisper. That's really not the point, is it? Morgan replied. I think we need to talk about why you've treated Claire like she wasn't worth a penny her entire life. And why you never planned to tell either of us the truth. As her mother began to quietly sob, and her father's face hardened into a mask of defiance, Morgan realized that this confrontation was just the beginning. The real challenge would be protecting Claire from the fallout, and ensuring that justice was finally served. How dare you go through our private papers, Richard hissed, reaching for the documents, but Morgan was faster, pulling them back across the table. How dare I? Morgan's voice rose. How dare you treat Claire like garbage for 30 years, because of something that was never her fault? Eleanor's sobs grew louder. You don't understand, Morgan. You can't possibly understand what this did to our marriage. What this did to your marriage? Morgan was incredulous. What about what you did to Claire? Your daughter, Dad, because regardless of biology, you chose to raise her. You chose to be her father, and then punished her every day for existing. Richard's jaw tightened. I provided a roof over her head, food, clothing, and education. The bare minimum, Morgan interrupted. You gave me everything and her nothing. You made her feel worthless her entire life. The dining room fell silent except for Eleanor's muffled crying. Richard stood abruptly, towering over the table. I did what any man would do in my position, he said coldly. I stayed. I didn't abandon your mother when many would have. I didn't abandon that child. Do you know how many men would have walked away? You should have, Morgan replied, her voice quiet but firm. If you couldn't love her, you should have walked away rather than torture her for 30 years. Eleanor looked up, mascara streaking her carefully made-up face. I begged him to try, Morgan. In the beginning, I begged him to forgive me and love her. And then you gave up, Morgan accused. You stood by and watched him destroy her self-worth. You're as guilty as he is. Richard slammed his hand on the table, causing the crystal glasses to jump and clink against each other. Enough. You have no right to judge us. No right at all. What's done is done. Who is her biological father? Morgan demanded. The question hung in the air. Eleanor looked down at her lap while Richard's face contorted with old rage. Someone from your mother's office, he finally spat. A summer intern. Half her age. Apparently, I wasn't exciting enough after 15 years of marriage. Eleanor flinched. It was a mistake. One mistake in all our years together. A mistake you've been punishing Claire for her entire life, Morgan countered. And what would you have had us do? Richard asked, his voice dangerously low. Tell a 5-year-old she was the product of her mother's affair. Tell a teenager that her real father was some college kid who went back to California 30 years ago. Destroy this family completely. There were other options besides emotional abuse, Morgan said. You could have treated her with basic human decency, for starters. Richard scoffed. We gave her everything she needed. No, Morgan's voice cracked with emotion. You gave her a lifetime of feeling like she wasn't enough. Do you know she still apologizes for taking up space? That she thinks she doesn't deserve success. That's your legacy, Dad. Eleanor reached across the table toward Morgan. Darling, please try to understand. We did our best in an impossible situation. Morgan pulled away from her mother's touch. Your best was cruel. And this, she tapped the will, this is unforgivable. cutting her out completely. Making sure she knows she's worth nothing to you, even after you're gone. What we leave to whom is our business, Richard said stiffly. Claire has never contributed to this family or our business. You have. It's as simple as that. She was never given the opportunity. Morgan's frustration boiled over. You never offered her the chances you gave me. You set her up to fail and then punished her for struggling. Richard's expression hardened. What exactly do you expect us to do now, Morgan? Rewrite history. Suddenly pretend we are one big happy family. I expect you to do the right thing, Morgan said, gathering the documents and returning them to the envelope. I expect you to acknowledge the damage you've done and try to make amends. Her father laughed coldly. And if we don't? What then? Will you tell Claire? Destroy this family out of some misplaced sense of justice. The threat was implicit in his tone. Choose sides, her sister or her parents. Morgan stood, clutching the envelope. Claire deserves to know why she was treated like she wasn't worth a penny her entire life, Morgan said. She deserves the truth. And yes, she deserves a fair share of your estate, not because of biology, but because you chose to be her parents. You don't get to discard her now. If you tell her, Eleanor whispered, you'll break her heart. No, Morgan replied, you already did that. I'm going to help her understand that it was never her fault. Richard's face flushed with anger. If you do this, Morgan, there will be consequences. Everything we've given you, your education, your condo, your business connections, all of it came with the understanding that you were loyal to this family. Morgan felt a chill at the naked threat. Her entire life had been built with her parents' support. Her business relied on connections her father had provided. Her home had been partially funded by them. In threatening her, her father was making it clear, she had prospered because she had played by their rules. Are you saying you'll cut me off too? Morgan asked quietly. Her father's silence was answer enough. Morgan took a deep breath, weighing 32 years of privilege against her sister's lifetime of pain. In that moment, she realized how her complicity had made her a part of her sister's suffering. By accepting her parents' preferential treatment without question, she had helped normalize Claire's mistreatment. Do what you have to do, Morgan finally said, heading toward the door. But understand this. I'm going to do what I should have done years ago, stand up for Claire. As Morgan walked out of her childhood home, she felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. She had just risked everything, her financial security, her business, her relationship with her parents, all for the sister who had never been given a fair chance. But as frightening as the future suddenly seemed, Morgan knew with absolute certainty that she was, at last, doing the right thing. Now she just had to figure out how to tell Claire the truth without shattering her completely, and how to ensure that justice would finally be served for them both. Morgan's hands shook as she pulled into the parking lot of Claire's apartment building. The modest three-story complex was a stark contrast to Morgan's luxury condo in downtown Boston, another reminder of the disparity that had defined their lives. She sat in her car for several minutes, the manila envelope on the passenger seat feeling like it contained explosives rather than papers. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been shaped by a lie? That the coldness they've felt for 30 years wasn't their fault, but the result of a bitter man's inability to separate an innocent child from his wounded pride. Claire opened her apartment door with a genuine smile, her eyes lighting up at the unexpected visit. Morgan. This is a nice surprise. Come in, I just made coffee. Claire's apartment was small but warm, filled with books, plants, and colorful artwork created by her students. Despite her modest means, Claire had created a home that felt more welcoming than their parents' mansion ever had. Is everything okay? Claire asked, her smile fading as she studied Morgan's face. You look upset. We need to talk, Morgan said, her voice unsteady. It's important. They sat at Claire's tiny kitchen table, steam rising from two mismatched mugs. Morgan placed the envelope between them, an unwanted barrier. "What's that?" Claire asked, her expression wary. "The truth," Morgan replied simply. "About why Mom and Dad have treated us so differently all these years." As gently as possible, Morgan explained what she had discovered. She watched Claire's expressions shift from confusion to shock to pain so deep it was physically visible. When she reached the part about Richard not being Claire's biological father, Claire's face went completely blank. "So I'm not," Claire whispered, "I'm not really a Davis." "You're as much a Davis as I am," Morgan insisted. "DNA doesn't make a family." "But Dad," he couldn't see past his hurt. "He's punished you your entire life for something that was never your fault." Claire sat silently for a long moment, then stood and walked to her living room window, staring out at nothing. "It makes sense now," she finally said, her voice hollow. "I always wondered what I'd done wrong. Why nothing I did was ever good enough. At least now I know." "You never did anything wrong," Morgan said fiercely, joining her sister at the window. "Never. This is on them, not you." Claire turned to Morgan with tears streaming down her face. "Why are you showing me this now? After all these years?" Morgan explained about finding the will, about the confrontation with their parents, about Richard's threats to cut her off as well if she stood by Claire. "And you still here?" Claire said wonderingly. "You could lose everything." "Not everything," Morgan replied, taking her sister's hands. "Not what matters most." For the first time in their adult lives, the sisters truly saw each other clearly, not as the golden child and the scapegoat, but as two women who had been manipulated by the people who should have protected them both. "What happens now?" Claire asked quietly. Morgan squeezed her hands. "Now we fight back. Together." Over the next few hours, they talked more openly than they ever had before. Claire revealed the depths of the emotional damage their parents had inflicted, the therapy sessions she couldn't really afford, the relationships she'd sabotaged because she didn't believe she deserved love, the career opportunities she'd passed up because their father's voice in her head told her she would fail. Morgan shared her own burdens, the pressure to be perfect, the isolation of being placed on a pedestal, and the growing realization that her parents' support had always been conditional on her compliance with their expectations. "I've enabled them," Morgan admitted painfully. "By accepting the favoritism, I helped normalize how they treated you." "I'm so sorry, Claire." "You were a child too," Claire said gently. "We were both manipulated." As the evening grew late, their conversation shifted from pain to possibility. What would justice look like? What did they want to happen next? "I don't care about the money," Claire insisted. "I never have. I just wanted them to be proud of me, to love me." "But that's never going to happen, is it?" "Probably not," Morgan acknowledged sadly. "But the money, it's not just money. It's acknowledgement. Recognition. You deserve an equal share not because of DNA, but because they chose to be your parents." They began to formulate a plan, a way to ensure that the Davis sisters would both be treated fairly, with or without their parents' cooperation. It would require legal help, courage, and a willingness to challenge the power dynamics that had defined their family for decades. As midnight approached, Morgan realized she needed to head home. Standing at Claire's door, she hesitated. "Are you going to be okay tonight? I can stay if you want." Claire's eyes were red from crying, but there was a new strength in her gaze. "I'll be okay. For the first time in my life, I think I understand that none of this was my fault." That's huge, Morgan." They embraced, holding each other tightly. As Morgan turned to leave, Claire called after her. "Morgan. Thank you. For telling me the truth. For standing with me." Morgan's throat tightened with emotion. Always, Claire. From now on, always. Driving home, Morgan felt both drained and determined. The road ahead would be difficult, she had no illusions about that. Her father was powerful, connected, and accustomed to getting his way. Taking him on would require every ounce of courage and intelligence both sisters possessed. But looking at the city lights reflecting on the bay, as she crossed the bridge toward home, Morgan felt something she hadn't expected: hope. For 30 years, the Davis family had operated under Richard's rules, with his secrets setting the terms. Now, at last, the truth was out, and with it came the possibility of real change. Hey everyone, can you believe we are already halfway through this family saga? I'm getting emotional just sharing this turning point with you all. The moment when Claire finally learned why she'd been treated so poorly her entire life was absolutely heartbreaking to witness. Before I continue with what happened next, I'd love to know if any of you have ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew. Drop your experiences in the comments below, and if you're finding this story compelling, please hit that like button to help others find it too. The confrontation that's coming next changed our lives forever, and I can't wait to share how we finally stood up to years of manipulation. The following Monday morning, Morgan sat in the elegant waiting room of Blackwell & Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious family law firms. Claire sat beside her, fingers nervously tapping on her purse. "Are you sure about this?" Claire whispered. "It's not too late to back out." Morgan squeezed her sister's hand. "I'm sure. We deserve better than what they've done to us." They had specifically requested an appointment with Catherine Blackwell herself, the firm's founding partner, and a legendary force in Massachusetts family law. Catherine was known for taking on powerful men who tried to use their wealth and influence to bend the legal system to their will. When the receptionist led them into Catherine's office, Morgan was immediately struck by the attorney's commanding presence. Though in her 60s, Catherine exuded energy and sharp intelligence. Her silver hair was cut in a precise bob, and her penetrating blue eyes seemed to evaluate everything about the Davis sisters in seconds. "So," Catherine said after they had exchanged pleasantries, "you want to challenge your father's estate planning. Tell me why I should take this case." For the next hour, Morgan and Claire laid out their story, providing copies of the documents Morgan had discovered. Catherine listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When they finished, Catherine removed her reading glasses and studied them both. "Let me be clear about what you're asking," she said. "You want to force your father to acknowledge Claire as a rightful heir, despite the DNA test, based on the fact that he chose to raise her as his daughter for 30 years. You're willing to go public with this story if necessary. And you, Morgan, are willing to risk your own inheritance and financial stability to stand with your sister." "That's correct," Morgan confirmed. Catherine nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. Your father has significant resources and, I assume, his own high-powered attorneys. This will get ugly before it gets better." "We understand," Claire said quietly. "Do you?" Catherine challenged. "Family secrets like these have a way of causing collateral damage. Are you prepared for the social fallout? The potential impact on your careers? The possibility that your father will use every weapon in his considerable arsenal to maintain control?" Morgan and Claire exchanged glances. They had discussed these risks extensively. "We are," Morgan answered firmly. A smile slowly spread across Catherine's face, the look of a strategic fighter who relished a worthy challenge. "Then let's get to work. I'll take your case." Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine and her team worked meticulously to build their strategy. Richard Davis, as expected, had engaged his own formidable legal counsel when served with Catherine's initial letters outlining the sisters' intentions to contest any will that disinherited Claire. Richard's first countermove came swiftly. Morgan arrived at her office one morning to find her largest clients, all connected to her father in some way, had simultaneously terminated their contracts. By noon, her landlord had called to inform her that the building's ownership group, which included Richard Davis, as a silent partner, would not be renewing her lease when it expired in 60 days. That evening, Morgan received notice that the bank was calling in the loan on her condo, a loan her father had apparently guaranteed personally, and had now withdrawn his support. "He's trying to crush you financially," Catherine observed during an emergency meeting. "It's a classic intimidation tactic. He believes if he threatens your livelihood, you'll abandon your sister." "He doesn't know me very well, then," Morgan said, though she couldn't entirely hide her anxiety. The business she had spent years building was evaporating before her eyes. Claire was experiencing her own form of retaliation. Anonymous complaints had been filed against her with the school board. Her tutoring clients began cancelling appointments. Someone had even called Child Protective Services, making vague but troubling allegations that required investigation. "This is what he does," Claire said dully during one particularly difficult strategy session. "He destroys anything that threatens him." But Catherine was undeterred. "This level of retaliation actually strengthens our case," she explained. "He's demonstrating a pattern of vindictive behavior that a judge will find very interesting." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Davis contacted Morgan secretly, requesting a meeting away from Richard's watchful eye. They met at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Eleanor looked smaller somehow, diminished, her usually perfect appearance showing signs of strain. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she said immediately. "He can't know, Morgan." "What do you want, Mom?" Morgan asked, her tone carefully neutral. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached into her purse and withdrew a small flash drive. "Evidence," she whispered. "Things I've saved over the years. Things that might help Claire." Morgan stared at the drive, then at her mother. "Why now? You've had 30 years to stand up for Claire." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "Because I was a coward. Because I've allowed Richard to control everything for so long that I forgot how to fight back. Because seeing you willing to lose everything to stand by your sister made me realize how badly I've failed both of you." Morgan accepted the flash drive cautiously. "This doesn't fix anything." "I know," Eleanor acknowledged. "Nothing can erase what we did to Claire. But maybe it can help ensure she gets what she deserves now." The drive contained a treasure trove of damaging information. Emails where Richard explicitly discussed his determination to punish Claire for Eleanor's infidelity, financial records showing how he had systematically diverted family resources away from Claire, even recordings of conversations where he admitted that his treatment of Claire was motivated by revenge rather than any failure on her part. Catherine was ecstatic. "This changes everything," she declared. "With this evidence, we can prove that Richard's actions constitute parental alienation and psychological abuse. No judge in Massachusetts would uphold a will that continues this pattern of deliberate cruelty." As their legal position strengthened, Richard escalated his efforts to break the sisters' resolve. He attempted to freeze Morgan's bank accounts by claiming financial impropriety. He spread rumors in their social circle about Claire's mental instability. He even tried to pressure the school district into terminating Claire's teaching contract. But for every attack, Catherine had a counter-strategy. She obtained emergency injunctions to protect Morgan's assets. She filed harassment complaints that forced Richard to cease his direct interference in Claire's employment. She methodically documented every vindictive action, building a case that painted Richard not as a respected businessman, but as an abusive father willing to destroy his daughters rather than treat them equitably. The pressure began to take its toll on Richard. Business associates, uncomfortable with the emerging picture of his character, began distancing themselves from him. The family's carefully cultivated social standing showed cracks, as friends chose sides. Even Richard's most loyal supporters questioned the viciousness of his campaign against his own daughters. 6 weeks into the legal battle, Catherine received a call from Richard's attorneys requesting a private meeting to discuss potential settlement terms. She immediately called Morgan and Claire. "He's feeling the pressure," she explained. "He knows we have him cornered legally, and that his reputation is suffering. He wants to negotiate. What do you think we should do?" Claire asked. Catherine's expression was serious but satisfied. "I think we've reached the point where we can dictate terms rather than just respond to his. The question is, what do you two really want out of this?" It was a profound question, one that forced the sisters to look beyond their immediate battle to the future they wanted to build. After everything they had endured, what would justice truly look like? Morgan and Claire spent an entire weekend discussing this question, exploring possibilities they had never considered before. By Sunday evening, they had reached a decision that felt right to both of them, a vision of justice that went beyond mere financial compensation to address the deeper wounds their family had suffered. On Monday morning, they presented their terms to Catherine, who raised her eyebrows in surprise before breaking into a wide smile. "Bold," she commented. "Very bold. But also perfect." As they prepared for the settlement meeting, Morgan felt a sense of calm purpose replace the anxiety that had driven her for weeks. Whatever happened next, she and Claire had already won the most important battle. They had refused to be divided, refused to be controlled, and refused to accept the unjust roles their father had assigned them. Now it was time to rewrite the rules of the Davis family once and for all. The settlement meeting was held in Catherine Blackwell's conference room, neutral territory that nonetheless gave the sisters a psychological advantage. Richard arrived flanked by 2 attorneys from Harrington and Pierce, his expression a mask of controlled fury. Eleanor came separately, sitting slightly apart from her husband, her eyes downcast. Catherine opened the proceedings with clinical precision. "We are here to discuss terms that would resolve the pending litigation regarding Richard and Eleanor Davis's estate planning and the documented pattern of parental alienation toward their daughter Claire." Richard's lead attorney, James Harrington, attempted to seize control of the narrative. "My client has generously agreed to consider adjusting his will to include a reasonable provision for Claire, despite having no legal obligation to do so. We propose—" "Actually," Catherine interrupted smoothly, "we are not here to entertain your client's proposals. We are here to present our terms." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You're hardly in a position to dictate terms." Catherine smiled thinly. "I believe we are. The evidence we've gathered, including the materials provided by Eleanor, would be extremely damaging in court. Not just to your estate plans, but to your business relationships and social standing." She slid a document across the table. "These are our non-negotiable terms." As Richard scanned the document, his expression shifted from anger to disbelief. "This is outrageous. You can't seriously expect—" "We do," Morgan interjected, meeting her father's gaze directly. "Every point on that document is necessary to address the harm you've caused." The terms were indeed bold. They demanded an equal 3-way division of the Davis estate between Morgan, Claire, and a newly established foundation dedicated to supporting children affected by parental alienation and family trauma. Richard's immediate resignation from the boards of 3 prestigious charitable organizations in Boston, to be replaced by Claire if the organizations consented. A public acknowledgement from Richard that he had treated Claire unjustly throughout her life for reasons that were not her fault. Funding for Claire to complete her master's degree in education and establish a learning center for disadvantaged children. A trust to cover lifetime therapy for Claire to address the psychological damage caused by decades of emotional abuse. A legally binding agreement that neither Richard nor Eleanor would interfere in their daughters' lives or businesses going forward. Richard slammed the document down. "I will not be publicly humiliated. I will not admit to abuse I never committed." You did commit it, Claire said quietly, the first words she had spoken since the meeting began. Everyone turned to look at her. For 30 years, she continued, her voice growing stronger, you punished me for being born. You made me believe I was worthless. You sabotaged my confidence, my relationships, my opportunities, and you did it deliberately, to hurt me for something I had no control over. Richard's jaw tightened. You're being melodramatic. No, Eleanor said suddenly. All eyes shifted to her. She's telling the truth, Richard. We both know it. The room fell silent as Eleanor straightened in her chair, looking directly at her husband for perhaps the first time in decades. I made a terrible mistake 30 years ago, she acknowledged. But you chose to punish an innocent child for my actions. You promised to raise her as your own, but instead, you made her childhood a prison sentence for my sin. Richard stared at his wife in shock. You're taking their side. After everything I've done for you. I'm finally doing what I should have done years ago, Eleanor replied, her voice trembling but determined. I'm telling the truth. And the truth is that you've been cruel to Claire in ways that can never be justified. Richard turned to his attorneys. This meeting is over. We'll see them in court. Before you make that decision, Catherine said calmly, you should know that we've prepared a detailed legal filing that includes all the evidence Eleanor has provided, plus testimonials from household staff, Claire's therapists, and numerous others who witnessed your behavior over the years. That filing becomes public record the moment we submit it. The implied threat hung in the air. Richard's reputation, the thing he valued above all else, would be shattered if these details became public knowledge. Richard's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear. After a tense moment, Richard's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. We can negotiate. The next 3 hours were grueling, with Richard fighting every point, while his attorneys repeatedly pulled him aside for private conversations. Eleanor remained silent but present, occasionally nodding in support of her daughter's position. By late afternoon, they had reached an agreement that, while modified from the original demands, still represented a profound victory for the sisters. The estate would be divided equally between Morgan, Claire, and a foundation they would jointly establish. Richard would step down from one major board position in favor of Claire, with the other positions to be reconsidered in 2 years. Richard would acknowledge privately to family members that he had treated Claire unfairly, though no public statement would be required. Claire would receive full funding for her education and learning center. The therapy trust would be established as requested. A non-interference agreement would be legally binding on all parties. As Richard signed the final documents, his face was a study in suppressed rage. He had been outmaneuvered and he knew it. I hope you're satisfied, he said bitterly to his daughters. You've managed to extort a fortune you didn't earn. No, Dad, Morgan replied evenly. We've managed to ensure that both of your daughters receive the acknowledgement and support they always deserved. There's a difference. As the meeting concluded and Richard stormed out, Eleanor approached her daughters hesitantly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, tears welling in her eyes. But I want you both to know how sorry I am, not just for the affair, but for failing to protect Claire all these years. For allowing this to happen. Claire looked at her mother for a long moment. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said honestly. But I'm willing to try to build something new. Something healthier. Eleanor nodded, accepting this limited olive branch as more than she deserved. As they left the law offices, Morgan and Claire walked arm in arm into the late afternoon sunlight, both emotionally exhausted, but filled with a sense of possibility that had never existed before. They had stood up to the man who had defined their lives for so long, and they had won not just a financial victory, but the freedom to define themselves on their own terms. What now? Claire asked softly. Morgan squeezed her sister's arm. Now we build the lives we want, not the ones he designed for us. together. 1 year later, Morgan stood at the podium, surveying the crowd gathered for the grand opening of the Davis Sisters Foundation. The renovated Victorian building in downtown Boston gleamed in the spring sunshine, its rooms now filled with resources for children affected by family trauma, parental alienation, and emotional abuse. "Welcome, everyone," she began, smiling at the familiar faces. "A year ago, my sister Claire and I discovered a painful truth that had shaped our family for decades. Today, we are transforming that pain into purpose." In the front row, Claire beamed with pride, sitting beside her graduate school advisor and several of her students. The past year had been one of remarkable healing and growth for both sisters. Claire had flourished once freed from their father's shadow. She had completed her master's degree with honors and had established her learning center in a disadvantaged neighborhood where her innovative teaching methods were already showing impressive results. The board position she had inherited from Richard had given her a platform to advocate for educational reform, and her quiet competence had quickly earned the respect of Boston's philanthropic community. More importantly, the therapy that had once been a financial strain was now fully funded, allowing Claire to work through decades of emotional damage. Morgan had noticed the change in her sister's demeanor, a new confidence, a willingness to stand her ground, an ability to accept praise without deflection or apology. Morgan's life had transformed as well, though in ways she hadn't anticipated. After losing her marketing clients to her father's influence, she had been forced to reinvent her business completely. Surprisingly, this upheaval had led her to discover her true passion, helping women entrepreneurs rebuild after financial setbacks. Her new consulting firm, Phoenix Strategies, was thriving, with a client list that owed nothing to her father's connections. Their relationship with their parents remained complicated. Richard had honored the legal agreement, but maintained emotional distance, his pride still wounded by his daughter's defiance. Eleanor, however, had undergone her own transformation. After decades of submitting to Richard's control, she had begun carving out an independent identity. She had moved into a separate wing of the family home and had started volunteering at Claire's Learning Center, a tentative but meaningful step toward redemption. As Morgan continued her speech, outlining the Foundation's mission and programs, she caught Claire's eye. They shared a moment of silent understanding, an acknowledgement of how far they had come since that Sunday dinner when Morgan had discovered the truth. "The Davis Sisters Foundation," Morgan continued, "is built on a simple principle: every child deserves to be valued, supported, and treated with dignity regardless of their circumstances. We believe that family trauma can be overcome, that patterns can be broken, and that healing is always possible." She didn't mention their father specifically, there was no need to. Everyone in Boston's social circles knew the outline of the Davis family drama, though the full details had remained private as agreed. Today marks not just the opening of this building, but the beginning of a journey to ensure that other children don't suffer in silence, as so many do. With your help, we will provide resources, advocacy, and hope to those who need it most. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and explored the Foundation's facilities, Claire pulled Morgan into a quiet corner. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" she asked, gesturing around them. "A year ago, I was just trying to survive each day, believing I wasn't worth anything. Now you know the truth," Morgan finished for her. "That you were always worth everything." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. For standing up for me when no one else would. For risking everything." Morgan hugged her sister tightly. "Best decision I ever made." Later that evening, after the guests had departed, the sisters sat alone in the Foundation's library, reflecting on their journey. "I received another letter from Dad's attorney today," Claire mentioned casually. "He wants to meet." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "What for?" Claire shrugged. "Apparently, he's been following the press about the Foundation. About my work at the Learning Center. He didn't say much, but his attorney hinted that he might be ready to. I don't know, not apologize exactly, but acknowledge something. Are you going to meet with him? Claire considered the question. I think so. Not because I need his approval anymore, I don't. But because I want him to see who I've become despite him, not because of him. Is that petty? Morgan laughed. Maybe a little. But you've earned the right to a little pettiness. They fell into comfortable silence, each lost in her own thoughts. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, fear, and overwhelming grief for the family they might have had if Richard had chosen love over resentment 30 years ago. But there had also been profound moments of discovery, of strengths neither sister knew they possessed, of a bond that had not just survived their parents' manipulation, but had grown stronger because of it. They had learned that family wasn't defined by DNA or even by shared history, but by the choice to stand together when it mattered most. As the evening deepened, Morgan raised her glass of champagne. To Worth, she said simply. Claire clinked her glass against her sister's. To Worth, she echoed. And to new beginnings. Outside the window, Boston's lights twinkled against the darkening sky, a constellation of possibilities neither sister would have dared imagine a year ago. They had demanded justice and received something even more valuable, freedom. Freedom from the roles they'd been assigned, from the lies they'd been told, and from the limitations that had been imposed upon them. And in that freedom, they had discovered their true worth, not as the golden child or the scapegoat, but as women of courage, compassion, and remarkable resilience. Hey everyone, thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this emotional journey. This story of family betrayal and ultimate justice has been incredibly personal to share. If you've ever experienced family dynamics where someone was unfairly treated or had to stand up against injustice, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Did Claire and I make the right choices? What would you have done differently? Your perspective means so much to me. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for more real-life family stories, and share this with someone who might need to hear that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it costs you everything. Remember that family isn't just about blood, it's about who stands beside you when it matters most. Until next time, value your worth and never let anyone convince you that you deserve less than equal treatment and respect.